Hello, Mr. Chung. In this video, I will be talking about Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs, how they affected America, as well as how they were cut short because of the Vietnam War. The president before Lyndon B. Johnson was JFK. He was able to democratically resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis, as well as bring in a lot of new technological advancements through the space race. He even tried to usher America into the new frontier by fixing the healthcare, education, economy, and society of America through policies. For example, the Equal Pay Act helped in fixing the problem of the gender wage gap in America. When Lyndon B. Johnson came into office after JFK's assassination, he continued these reforms through the Great Society. His goals through these programs was to end poverty and racial discrimination, as well as give more opportunities to children through education. One of the first things he did was sort of expand on the social security system made during FDR's second New Deal during the reconstruction of the Great Depression through Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare gave those who were in retirement age insurance for the hospital. Medicaid allowed for those poor and disabled who didn't have insurance to receive medical services. So Medicare and Medicaid helped those who were in poverty or unfortunate situations. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act helped give children more opportunities for success. This was because through this, the government was able to help schools where minorities and poor people went to. Schools where the kids usually would not have good opportunities for success without the aid of the government. He even pushed for the funding of public arts and humanities programs. One example of this is PBS Kids. These programs still last today, and I remember I used to grow up watching Sesame Street on PBS Kids. Also, a total side note, I remember when Mitt Romney was running for president in 2012, he talked about defunding the PBS program, which included PBS Kids, and I really did not want that to happen, and it didn't, so yeah. Because of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, more immigrants were able to come into America. This is because it hired the amount of immigrants who were allowed to come from the Eastern and Western hemispheres. These acts sort of loosened the restrictions on the Immigration Act of 1924, which established these immigration quotas. Despite the great success of these policies, the progress of the Great Society was cut short mainly because of the Vietnam War effort. While Lyndon B. Johnson was pushing for the Great Society programs, he also had to help with the Vietnam War. He saw the war in Vietnam as a major piece in the Cold War, so he took great priority on it. Because both the Great Society and the Vietnam War effort were very costly, the government had to be stingy in how it spent its money. It ended up raising the tax rates, as well as redirecting funds from the Great Society to the war effort. Because of this, the Great Society reforms weren't as effective. Also, Lyndon B. Johnson began to lose more and more political support because of the unpopularity of the Vietnam War effort. Many African American civil rights leaders were now against the war effort because it put more burden on African Americans. This was different to how during World War II, African American leaders supported the war effort because it would help provide jobs. Another reason people were against the war is because more people went to colleges and were educated. This increase in college education was partly caused by the GI Bill after World War II, which allowed the government to give loans to veterans who wanted to go to college. Many of the professors were telling their students to think more critically about the war, and this caused many of them to not join because of the perceived discrimination within the drafting, as well as the many atrocities committed within the war. Also, for the Vietnam War, the soldiers were mostly drafted rather than volunteered, and most of the citizens didn't really want to serve in the military. This spirit is very different from the widespread patriotism that swept across America after the bombing of Pearl Harbor when America had first joined the war, which led to many young Americans volunteering themselves for service. There was also a credibility gap between the media and the government during the Vietnam War. So the government was telling the citizens that the war was doing very well and that they were winning. However, the television and journalists said otherwise. This led to the credibility of the government to go down. This credibility gap is very similar to the issue of fake news that we have today, where different media sources will push different narratives of the government and politics. It was for these reasons that Lyndon B. Johnson lost his political support, which caused him to not run for a second term. Because he stepped down, the progress made during the Great Society reforms were not continued, because the next president, Richard Nixon, did not continue his policies. Although Lyndon B. Johnson had a great vision for America through the Great Society reforms, he fell short on it because of the precarious situation he was put in through the Vietnam War. That being said, the Great Society reforms made great improvements to America. For example, mortality rates declined because Medicare and Medicaid help provide the elderly, the poor, and the unfortunate with health care. Kids who are poor and minorities were given more opportunities because of the government-aided education programs. It even led to the creation of PBS Kids, which still exists today. Although the goals of the Great Society weren't fully realized, it displays the power of democracy in that positive changes can be made to accommodate for the people's needs when leaders, no matter how flawed they are willing to do what it takes to make those changes.